Hello and welcome to Top Story. Pakistan's military leader has stunned the world by imposing a state of emergency. Since announcing the move on Saturday, President Pervez Musharraf has had hundreds of opponents arrested and cracked down on judges who've challenged his rule. He claims he's saving his country from a descent into extremism and chaos. Hundreds of people have died in a wave of Islamist attacks since Pakistani commandos stormed the Red Mosque in July to crush a Taliban-style insurrection. But many people suspect Musharraf's real motive was to preempt the Supreme Court from invalidating his recent re-election. Judges were due to make a decision today. His strategy is fraught with risks, though. A power-sharing deal with former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto is now in doubt. And there's a question mark over US support and crucial financial aid. Until now, Washington has praised Musharraf as a key ally in the war on terrorism. To discuss this crisis, I'm joined now by Professor Jean-Pierre Mileli, a geopolitical analyst at Sciences Po, France's leading higher education institute for the study of politics. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is a high-risk gamble to rescue Musharraf's power base, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and the outcome is far from clear. But it doesn't change the challenge that General Musharraf is facing. But he will be more isolated to face it.
What about the splits in his own party? It's often said that the other parts of the political spectrum are against him, but even within his own party there are doubts.
It is said that even in last August, he thought about declaring such a state of emergency, but that Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice deterred him by phone call. So the plan was in his mind since many months, because he was under such terrific pressure during the last 8 months. From the street, from the parties, and from the judiciary.
And what do you think he hopes to gain in the long term? Because in the short term he can stave off this court decision, but what happens after that?
In the long term, I think he's trying to maintain his grasp on power. And if you look at the first moves he made in the last 3 days, it was to repress opposition parties and human rights groups and the like. So it wasn't directed against Islamic militants, but it was rather his grasp on power and the control over the Supreme Court, which was very important in his view.
But there was a crackdown on an Islamic party as well, so he seems to be going for everybody, not just for these judges and lawyers.
Yes, but the first move was to take control of the Supreme Court by changing the Chief Justice. He's now another man, which is more lenient to him than Mr. Chowdhury.
Can we expect then this new Supreme Court to rubber stamp his re-election bid with this compliant new judge?
I think that was the aim of that move.
Mm-hmm. Where does this leave the power sharing deal then with Benazir Bhutto?
It's in real danger, and I think also that Mrs. Bhutto's career is at stake, because if she can rally people under her power, she may lead the opposition, but she may also face exile or jail.
What can she do now in that case?
It's really hard to say. It's really hard to say, but I think she will try to lead the opposition by remaining in Pakistan and not have the same fate as former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif that had been exiled a few weeks ago.
Can she really rally people round, because she has an opportunity, at least on paper, to present herself as the opposition candidate now, in opposition to Musharraf?
Yes, but the fact is that by enter in a power-sharing deal with Musharraf, she lost many of her credibility. On the contrary, Mr. Sharif gained credibility by resisting and opposing. And remember that it was his exile, the exile decision by General Musharraf imposed on him, that caused the beginning of the struggle between the Supreme Court and General Musharraf.
So what could his next step be to present himself as the next opposition leader that can actually
Exactly. His popularity was very low when he lost power many years ago, but now he's gaining much more credibility, even if he's in exile today.
But presumably he can't come back now with this new Supreme Court. There's even less chance of him.
No, he
being
can't.
validated.
But he may direct opposition from abroad.
Let's talk a little bit about the international aspects. Condoleezza Rice, the US Secretary of State, said, "We never put all of our chips on President Musharraf." That's a pretty stark warning, isn't it?
Is it? But you may have noticed that even if the Secretary of State criticized Musharraf's moves and also the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad, the Pentagon said quite frankly that Pakistan is a great ally in the war on terror. That means that all the money that was paid to the Pakistani military last years won't be forgotten, and I suppose that the main move from the U.S. will be to stick to the Musharraf's choice, unless there is another candidate in the army, because Musharraf is not important as an individual. Of course, he has his own story and charisma, but he's a figure of the military establishment.
Is there any question mark over aid, particularly US aid, or is this all part of US support for this ally in the war of terror that won't change?
I think it won't change, because with U.S. soldiers in the near Afghanistan, and we have the threat from the Al-Qaeda leadership in the Waziristan, they have no choice. U.S. have no other choice to date. And
just briefly, Jean-Pierre, where does this leave the planned offensive against Taliban sympathizers and militants in Waziristan?
It is said that the Pakistan military is at disadvantage in the Waziristan, and Islamic militants freed nearly 200 soldiers that were taken captive in August by Islamic militants. So it shows the bluntness of Islamic militants and their ability to gain control over the Pakistani army.
Okay, thank you very much. Jean-Pierre Mileli from Sciences Po here in Paris, talking to me about the Pakistani crisis. Do join me at the same time tomorrow for another edition of Top Story.